Hi everyone, well today I'm looking at the Sigma 70 to 300mm f4 to 5.6 APO lens. This is the budget version for my Canon camera without image stabilization, or OS as Sigma likes to call it. So handheld video makers and low light shooters might want to try something different, I'll tell you right off the bat. I've got a new copy here with Sigma's new and improved black coating. Even so, this is probably the ugliest camera lens ever made. The rear of the lens is fat enough to go on the South Beach diet, and it awkwardly gets thinner towards the front, forming this bizarre pear shape. The autofocus is comparatively slow and noisy, as you can see here. This could be a nightmare if you're trying to shoot sport or wildlife. If you're using the macro mode, then the autofocus becomes agonizingly slow. It can be strangely comical watching someone trying to autofocus this thing. Like some monstrous Victorian contraption, it agonizingly extends and twists and keeps making that wheezing noise, like an asthmatic dinosaur in the mating season. The Canon L lens red ring at the front isn't going to fool anyone. It's more like some bitterly ironic joke. The zoom ring functions smoothly, although it isn't damped, and the focus ring is pretty precise, although that isn't damped either. The front elements turn as you focus, which is a pain if you're trying to use a polarizing filter. One really cool advantage is that this makes a pretty good macro lens, giving a 1:2 ratio, which means it's halfway to being a true macro lens. Even though it doesn't have floating elements inside the lens, the image quality of those close-up macro shots isn't too bad. Here you can see how dirty my stapler is. And my glasses need a clean too. The macro switch is a pretty bizarre and awkward design. The lens has to be between 200 and 300mm, then you switch it to macro, but then the zoom ring is stuck above 200mm. And then you can't switch it back to normal unless you turn the focus ring past the endpoint, normally necessitating switching it back to manual focus. When you're first trying to figure it out, it makes you so angry you could stick your head in an electric fly zapper. Sigma must have a huge pile of returned lenses from people who thought they were just broken or something. But these are all things you could expect of a budget lens. The most important thing is image quality. So how does it look? In terms of sharpness, the lens is good. Starting at the middle at 70mm. It's slightly soft wide open at f4, but not too bad, and when you stop down to f5.6 and then f8, it becomes very sharp. I'll tell you now, it's always as sharp in the corners as it is in the middle, which is unusual and pretty commendable. Zoom in to 300mm and sharpness just about holds up. Wide open at f5.6 it is a bit soft. Stop down to f8 though and things get much better. Again, sharpness is uniform across the frame. The corners stay virtually as sharp as the middle. Sigma gives this lens the title APO, which stands for apochromatic, meaning resistant to chromatic aberration. Now this isn't quite true, not on an APS-C camera anyway. There's no chromatic aberration in the centre of the images, as you can see here, but chromatic aberration pops up quite a bit in the corners. Here you can see it at 70mm, those annoying colours on contrasting edges, and it gets a little worse when you zoom into 300mm. However, overall, this isn't too bad for a budget lens. The lens is also pretty resistant to longitudinal chromatic aberration, and only when you look closely will you spot some purple and yellow fringing in the foreground and background bokeh. And the bokeh is pretty nice on this lens. It looks smooth, and it's free of weird highlights and busyness. When you stop down a lens with a 9-bladed aperture, you get these cool 18-point sun stars. At f9, I've stopped down and you can see them emerging, and looking really cool at f22. Other things? There's no vignetting that I can see, which is great. Colours are fairly neutral. Contrast is just okay. Overall, the image quality holds up really well on cameras with an APS-C sensor. The image quality has no real weaknesses, but no major strengths either. One advantage of this lens is that it is a full-frame lens, probably why it's so big. This means that if you want to use it on a film camera, or if you upgrade to a full-frame digital camera, then you're good to go. But I can't vouch for its picture quality there until I get a Canon 5D Mark III or something like that. So basically, if you can find this lens really cheap and you're on a budget, then it could get you some good pictures, despite its weird design. But I can't help thinking that for about the same price you could get the image stabilized Canon 55 to 250mm lens. Although it performs slightly worse than the Sigma optically, it does go down wider to 55mm, which is useful, and image stabilization is invaluable. 70 to 300mm is a pretty awkward focal length on an APS-C body, which is most digital SLR cameras. As someone who loves image stabilization, I'd recommend the Canon 55 to 250mm, which are previously reviewed. But if you can pick up this Sigma lens for a very good price, then go ahead.